Welcome, Mike, to Game Thinking Live.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to get to talk to you. Anytime I get to talk to you, I leave more illuminated.
Thank you very much. I'm always excited to talk to you, Amy.
So just tell us your full name and where you work and what you do.
My name is Mike Sellers, and I work at Indiana University, and I'm a professor of practice here, which means that I came out of industry a few years ago into the university to teach game design.
Can you give us a little glimpse into what you do day to day and some of the challenges you face and the work you're actually doing? Maybe tell us a story from something that happened this week.
Sure. So I spend my time divided between teaching and mentoring students and doing my own creative work, which the university is very supportive of. We have a unique program here where we are trying to graduate students with 2 to 3 years experience, as if they had been in industry for that long. So we give them some of the industry experience, the good and the bad, the hard and the easy. So like I said, I teach a couple of studio classes, which are terrific fun. We actually, a little story, we actually just canceled a project. So our students are on long-term projects. They're on teams. They're learning a lot of teamwork and leadership. And sometimes the teams don't work out or the projects don't work out. In this case, the team was doing really, really well, but the project was just not gelling. And that happens sometimes. Anytime you're trying to do something new and innovative, sometimes it's not going to work. They need to learn that that's the case. We have it built into our program that we can cancel the projects, and we do. And so all those students are now on new teams, which means they're learning to leave the old project behind and go to the new project, and the new team is learning to accept these new people in. So it's a lot of learning going on in both the personal level and the technical level and professional level, and it's wonderful to see because they really step up.
Sounds like you're preparing them for the games industry to me.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. Although I will say, even beyond the games industry, we're trying to prepare them for just life in the 21st century. Anything they're doing, games, I think, is still leading that. Any place they go, they're going to have to know how to work in a team and be innovative quickly, and frankly, understand when something isn't working.
That's really powerful. So as you're teaching your students this, and as you think about what's worked for you in the past in your work life, which we're going to get into in a moment, how do you think about filtering feedback? How do you think about when they're playtesting, who they're playtesting on, how to listen to those people, when to cancel the project, when not to, etc.? How do you take in and then make decisions on feedback from different sources?
That's a fantastic question. There's a word that gets thrown around a lot now, curation, which I believe in, really. I think we all, consciously or not, we all curate everything around us, right? We don't perceive everything around us. We don't think of everything around us. I think you have to approach feedback really, really carefully and with an eye for that kind of curation, where first and foremost, not just looking for things that confirm what you already think or confirm what you hope is true. This is something that I really learned doing startups, is the idea about looking for non-confirming evidence. What is it that I'm seeing or hearing or the feedback that I'm getting that is telling me something that I need to listen to that is not where I want it to go? That is, we want to take a project a certain direction, and the feedback we're getting is, really this needs to go in a different direction, or the direction you're going is not really that fruitful. That said, you need to be very careful, I think, not to just listen to people who say, oh, everything is wonderful or everything is terrible. And in particular, what I discovered over time is that in just a few questions, I can often determine if someone is looking at something from sort of a framework of what exists already and they want to stay within that framework, they want a better buggy whip, or are they able to look outside that framework and understand, oh, we may be providing something new that they didn't know that they wanted, and give us feedback on that. And those are the people that are really, really valuable in terms of feedback.
And that's exactly what game thinking surfaces, is those specific people. And they're not always easy to find.
No, that's true. That's very true. I will say, doing focus groups, we often found we would ask a few questions and find people, it's like, okay, you're going to say yes to anything I say, anything I ask you. You're going to say no to anything I ask you. And these other people, you're going to give me some really interesting, meaty information. And those are the ones that are just like gold in any kind of feedback situation.
And then there's focus groups versus other structures.
Oh, so we do mostly a live playtesting for our students' work. At different stages of a project, we need to have different stages of playtesting and different stages of feedback, different kinds of feedback they're looking for. But we really emphasize you have to go get the feedback ready or not. So every week they go out and they do a play test with whatever they have. So it's mostly person to person. We do some where we ensure that the people who are testing something have never seen it before. And we do some where we ensure that they have seen it before and they can add to their mental model and say, oh, I thought this before and now I think something different. Is that because they learned something or because we changed something? Those are all really useful things for any product, of course, and of course for our students as well.
So you actually have really different, carefully selected cohorts.
Sometimes, and sometimes we just put pizza out and give you a slice of pizza if you test for 5 minutes.
Yep. You do what you can.
Exactly.
So you've got an amazing history, too long to go into here. We'll definitely provide lots of links in bio. But you and I connected through the MMO world where you created, I think, the first graphical MMO.
First 3D. Yeah, first 3D MMO.
First 3D MMO.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that come about and who was on your team?
This is not a story I tell often. Honestly, it came about because I dreamed about it. And I've been playing a lot of role-playing games, and that was probably just infecting my dreams. But I had this idea that you could be online and be in with other people that you'd never met, and be in a graphical environment, in a really immersive graphical environment, and play together and work towards a common goal together. This was in the early 1990s. So CD-ROMs were just coming out, and we had the idea that we could actually put all the graphical elements and sound elements we would need for a game onto the CD-ROM, so we wouldn't have to send them over the internet. We were talking to a lot of investors at the time, and we would constantly get this question of, could the internet 2800 baud or whatever it was, we couldn't actually push the pictures over the internet, which was true at the time. But with having them on a CD, we could assemble things on the client side. And so we had a server, one of the first real server client setups that way. We assembled, as you often do, a ragtag team that turned out to be a really wonderful team. So it was myself, my brother, who was getting his MBA from Berkeley at the time. And then we also joined forces with John Hankey. He came on to do our marketing, and all three of us worked together at a couple more startups after that. He later went on to do what became Google Maps and later start Niantic. He's gone on to terrific things. But we had a group of about 20 people, a little more than 20 people total. Very, very small budget, really, really shoestring, if that budget. But we made it work like you do with a lot of startups. This also taught me one of my first big startup lessons, which is that you want to be where the market is, or just surf a little ahead of the market, whereas I think we were probably at least a good year ahead of the market. That turned out to make things a little bit harder for us. Unfortunately, this has also been kind of a constant in a lot of things I've done. I've been a little too early. Too early is, I think, as bad as too late, maybe worse in some ways. It adds some frustration.
So for example, you were early with AI. Now AI is very hot. I have some amazing clients doing great deep learning applications in existing fields, and it's so exciting. And there you can get algorithms on GitHub.
Right, exactly. And it is a terrific, exciting area. So I started a company in 2002 to do AI work. I was convinced, and still am, but at the time I was absolutely convinced AI was going to be a huge area. And I'm primarily interested in what we call social AI, which is a little bit of a different breed than the deep learning part, although that stuff is just fascinating. But the social AI was primarily about making characters that you could interact with in a game or simulation or other settings. We talked about having your own personal concierge, for example. We did some work with DARPA, did several contracts with DARPA that were terrific fun and learned a lot. And we're able to do some real good too. We're able to create an AI architecture that is still unique, in that is primarily based on emotional reasoning. And we're able to help do some training simulations for the US military. Unfortunately, in trying to market that more broadly, we discovered that we were, again, too early. I think now, probably 10 years too early, but that's something that I continue to work on and have hopes for the future. I think the work that's going on now, primarily in deep learning, is amazing, and it's really getting people to understand what AI can and can't do, or what it does well and what it has a little bit of a hard time doing. I think we're all seeing a lot more automation in our lives, certainly down to automated vehicles. I believe we're going to see in the next, my predictions on timelines are not always the best, but in the next 5 to 10 years, I really do believe we're going to see a lot more of the personal automation, in terms, like I said, the personal concierge, where I can have my agent talk to your agent to arrange a time for an interview. And that's the kind of thing that's just going to be automating our lives.
Well, we're already partway there.
We are. And it's hurtling along quickly.
It's fascinating. So you talk about emotional reasoning. Where did you get the background to be able to actually dig into that and build systems that would do that?
Well, the first part was I have an undergraduate degree and some graduate work in cognitive science. I was in the middle of grad school and had a terrific job offer, so I never finished the graduate work. So that certainly set me up. This is now in the early 1980s. That's how far back I go. Trying to combine psychology, neurology, and computer science, which I know is an area that you know very well. At the time, I had to convince a lot of people that this was something that was going to be a viable area. I think, though, beyond that sort of domain knowledge, one of the things I really learned during that time in the startups I've done since is to be able to cast a wide net and to learn a lot of new things. So I certainly had to go back and reread my Maslow, for example, and Ekman and other people who are doing great emotional research. But I really had to go do a lot of work on some deep computer science algorithms that I hadn't learned ever before to support the architecture. That kind of ability to cast a wide net and to really dig in and learn something quickly, I think is something that my background has set me up well for, and I believe is something that we need more and more of as time goes on. It's something we try and teach our students here. Frankly, as a companion to systems thinking, I want them to be able to see the systems in anything. Frankly, you could say see the game in anything, and to be able to think that way rather than just trying to think about a linear set of facts or this is the domain that I know and I'm not going to go outside of it.
As you engage students and train them in systems thinking, which is so fundamental to 21st century innovation.
Exactly.
What are the common blind spots that you're running into that, hopefully helping them overcome through long-term projects and learning it themselves? What are those first blind spots that keep people from really being system thinkers?
I think the first thing is that we're all trained to be very immediate thinkers, trained to think that there's a cause and an immediate effect. And if we can identify the immediate effect, we can look back just a little bit and say, oh, well, the thing that just happened before that caused this. And if I fix that or change that cause, then I can change the whole situation. And of course, what we know to be true is that things are rarely, if ever, that simple, that there's many, many, many different factors going on. And so I teach my students everything from, we touch on ecology and political science and doing some work on how municipal water systems work. All of these things are systems that affect their lives. And even before we get into game design, we're talking about how wolves change the ecology and the physical structure of Yellowstone Park, and how whales change climate, and how our use of water changes the supply of water, which seems simple, but once you dig into it, actually, there's quite a lot of systemic complexity there. And then we start applying this in terms of game design. And for me, the real bridge there is that I believe games are, at their essence, systems, and that by doing game design and game thinking, that we can encourage more systems thinking and help people come over that hump to where they're seeing things more as systems and less as linear A to B to C kind of causality change. Those causality changes are definitely there, but they're only part of the picture. And if you're focused on that small part of the picture, you're not going to get the larger part. So this is, like I said, I think this is something that certainly will make them better game designers, but I believe will make them better in every part of their lives.
And I don't think you can build a compelling path to mastery without being a system thinker.
I agree completely. And again, as far as my application of this in games in many ways give us the most obvious way to sort of inhabit the system and to tinker with the system and to see how the system works. But this extends far beyond that. Likelihood, not all of our students are going to go on to a career in the games industry, and that's fine. We really want to prepare them for wherever they go. Some of them might go into environmental affairs. We do a fair amount of that here at IU. International governance, we do a lot of that as well. And these things all apply. We had reports back now. They take these lessons with them, which of course just warms my heart. I love hearing that.
You now have a job where you're training the innovators of the future, basically.
I hope so, right.
So being a little ahead of the curve is working out.
Finally, yes, it is.
Finally. So what are you seeing now that you're planted in that space? What are the interesting trends you're following? What was hot that's kind of trailing off? What's on your horizon? What are you seeing? What are you paying attention to?
There's a number of different things. I think certainly automation in a lot of ways. Automation and interconnection. Everyone's talking about the Internet of Things. I think we don't really understand yet what the Internet of Things is. That to me is like where the web was in 1993. We first saw a few pictures online. Oh, that's pretty interesting. We had no idea what the web could become. I think the same is true of the Internet of Things. There's some really compelling, to me, figures of the number of interconnected devices has gone from about 1,000 in the mid-1980s to edging up on 50 billion by 2020. There's going to be a phase change, I think, there in terms of how we interact with the world and how the objects around us interact with each other. There are some larger societal changes too that I see. This is one that I really believe this one in the same way I believed in cognitive science, in the same way I believe artificial intelligence is going to be big and that MMOs are going to be huge. So I can't say I have a 100% hit rate, and I'm often off in my timing. But I'm very interested in a trend towards ruralization. I think there's a number of things that point to this. And to me, this is one of the bigger societal trends that I see, where between interconnection and automation and automated vehicles being a big part of this, as well as just some of the overall societal changes we see, particularly in the United States, I think we're going to see some really interesting, not full-on de-urbanization, but the reblooming, if you will, of small towns across America. They've been in decline for the last 50 to 70 years, and I think we've passed the low point there. Now, Part of this may be because I live in the Midwest now, which I never ever thought I would do. But being here makes me see some signs of this. And these are very, very early things. But it's one that I'm more and more interested in terms of how that changes us as a society and what new economic niches and product niches this opens up. I don't think we have any idea what those are yet, but it's one you'll have to check back in a decade or so and see if that's picked up any steam at all. I will say, I do have one data point. Excuse me. I do have one data point. There was a company in San Francisco that is paying its employees to delocate, as they're calling it, outside of the major urban areas because they're all telecommuting. So why do they all have to be in a big city where it's expensive for the company to have them as employees when they could live someplace else they might rather live? So this is one that I'm watching. Not a technical trend, I'll grant you, but one that I think has a lot of technical feeders into it.
That's fascinating. I think there's some clues to be had from things that are going on in India, maybe Colombia, because there's a lot of going out, reaching out to the rural people, helping them thrive where they are versus trying to get them to move to the cities. It's at a different phase and it's a very different country, but sometimes there's these surprising lessons,
Right.
from countries that are ahead of us in ways you might not think.
I think it's very true. And I think bringing this out to the global stage, I think San Francisco and Silicon Valley is always going to be, as far as I can see, is going to be a huge hub of innovation, no question. But you can look out to places like Helsinki or Stockholm, where there's a lot of game innovation going on there. Certainly, Costa Rica, lots of places across China and Asia. So in the same way, I think it's not out of line to think, well, maybe we could do that a little bit elsewhere, Monterey, Mexico, Chicago, Bloomington, Indiana, who knows? But I think there's more and more things that allow that to happen. And I think it's going to be interesting as a societal trend to watch.
If you could give a piece of advice to one of your brightest students going off in the world and to young entrepreneurs who are going to come to office hours and to brilliant corporate innovators who are trying to innovate in a smart way inside of existing machine.
Right.
That's based on what you've actually seen work versus not work,
right,
about how to innovate successfully.
I think the kinds of things I would say is to, on the one hand, keep hold of that burning desire that you have to innovate, to do something new and significant, but then to moderate that very, very carefully and not try and aim too far ahead. If there's one sort of life lessons that I think I can provide, it's that you can aim too far ahead, and that it may not seem satisfying in the moment to say, we're not going to try and change 10 things. We're going to try and change one thing or possibly two things. That's when I know that I've been most successful commercially, when I've really tried to restrain that and say, what are the one or two most important things here that I can change? Not the 10 things that I want to change or 10 things I want to introduce into a product. So by focusing just on the one or two things, you can actually put a lot more impact and a lot more push behind those than if you disperse that across 10 different things that may all sound great. On top of which, if you are successful in those one or two things, then you get another chance. And then you can do 3, 4, and 5. And eventually you get up to 10. But if you try and do all of them at once, you're just not going to be successful.
That's great and hard-won advice.
Very hard one.
So what really lights you up? What do you feel is your superpower when you're really in your element?
I love learning new things. I love going to an environment where I really don't know anything and trying to catch up with smart people as fast as I can. A number of years ago, I had the opportunity to do some consulting with microscopy scientists. I know a little bit about how to run a microscope, and I know a little bit about biological sciences, but I had to catch up on everything from their acronyms to where they were coming from, what kind of products they're trying to build. And frankly, one of the things I was trying to really find was, what are their blind spots and how can we help that in terms of the product innovation? And that to me that's my playground. Going and talking with the military or going and talking with physicists or water engineers, these are things I really don't know anything about, but it gives me the opportunity to learn something new about it. And I think one of the things I do best is come to speed on those things very, very rapidly. Some of it is just if I say the right words, I can get by. I cannot embarrass myself in a conversation. But I do know that there's a lot of learning that goes along. And I think it goes back to some things we've already talked about in terms of being able to create a mental model, be able to create things and put them into a system, helps me understand them very, as rapidly as I can. And it's always a challenge. That's why I like it.
Well, I guess a mental model is a system.
Exactly.
As you say. And I think that what you're really talking about is the advantage of being a system thinker. And I'm so glad that you're out there educating people to be system thinkers. I've heard that it's one of the things that is holding back a lot of UX designers from getting certain really great jobs is they're not system thinkers. They're afraid of it.
Right.
And in fact, game thinking, and at Game Thinking Live, what we teach is system thinking 101. It's just sneaking it in with the core learning loop.
Right, exactly.
And as we know, every complex system started as a simple system that worked.
Right. That's exactly right. And that the core learning loops is such a key part of it. That's in my work, how we connect up with the model of the world that's in the game and the model of the world that's in the player's head, or the same is true with any product. Product is trying to communicate something to the user, and the user has to think about that as a system. So being able to think about that in terms of using game thinking, I think is a terrific approach.
It's really helpful too with MVPs, because first of all, MVP is a process, not one destination.
Right, I love that.
But it's so hard to know. So many people want to build the onboarding because it's pretty and the stakeholders always like it. And yeah, you need onboarding because you need growth, but then they miss out on that learning loop. There's nothing to learn. There's nothing to get better at.
Right, exactly.
And if you just do the most stripped down little tiny bit of value that is something you can get better at, you can hone in and get your MVP going. I think of that as, well, that's how I learned to do game design. That was what we called finding the fun.
Precisely.
And so if you translate it to product design, you can really bypass a lot of those common blind spots and mistakes that hold people up with MVPs. But you have to embrace just the basics of system thinking and say, I'm building a core system.
And this goes back to innovate on one thing, not all the things, just one thing. I also think that people sometimes try and build like the onboarding, the tutorial, frankly, because they're trying to learn themselves. What is it we're building? What is it we're doing here? And that's a separate loop. That's really a separate thing from what the product needs to be and the product loop needs to be.
Exactly. So is there somebody or something you're getting inspiration from these days? You're writing a book. Tell us about the book, and we can talk more about it when we see you live.
So I'm writing a book on systems thinking and what I'm calling systemic game design. So it is joining up real deep, meaty systems thinking with game design and how we do that. And there's a lot that applies to product design well beyond game design. But in part, what I'm trying to do is to get down below the surface. There's a lot we do in talking about games and teaching about games that is really fairly surface oriented. And so I'm trying to get down to, how do you become a systems thinker? What are the aspects, the real stripped down core aspects of a system? And then how can we take those back and apply those to a game? So the first part of the book, which I've just completed a large draft of, is what I say is digging the foundation. So you want to build a tall building. The first thing you need to do is dig a hole, which may seem like the exact opposite of what you want to do, because you want to build a building up, not down. But we have to dig that foundation first and build that foundation, and then we can build a building on top of it. And like we've been discussing, I think the same is true of a lot of systems thinking in general. You have to dig down to that foundation, really understand the system that you're trying to build and understand what systems are, and then build that into your product. That's what I'm trying to write about.
I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
And the world needs it. So thank you so much for writing. And thank you so much for your time today and sharing your stories, sharing your wisdom in these hard-won lessons.
Thank you. Always helpful for me, I have to say, to talk with you and to talk about things like this. And I have to say, too, I'm really looking forward to meeting out in San Francisco. That's going to be fantastic.
It is going to be great. I can hardly wait.